So, I didn't plan to tell you this story, but now it's been 6 months, and I think I'm safe enough to finally share it. As you can already tell from the title, yes, I threw a swinger party at the university, and trust me, I didn't think things would spiral the way they did. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything, and I'm certainly not proud of how it ended, but I think it's important to share the whole story. I'm still processing everything, and honestly, I haven't had the chance to reflect until now. Before I dive in, let me clarify something. I'm not going to give you the exact details of where this happened. If you're familiar with my background, you'll understand why. A little anonymity is necessary, especially with what happened afterward. So yeah, I was working as a physical education teacher at the university, and honestly I loved it. The students liked me too. I could tell by the way they joked with me and looked up to me. But that's neither here nor there. This isn't about them. It's about me, my crazy idea, and what went down behind closed doors. To set the stage. It was late in the semester, and I had just wrapped up 6 different physical education classes. We were doing final tests, and I had no idea how drained I'd end up feeling. I know, you're probably thinking it's just teaching gym classes, how hard can that be? But I swear, managing 50 students, each of them needing feedback and attention, had me worn out beyond belief. And to make it worse, everyone had gone home for the summer break except for the faculty. It was just me and a few colleagues running around the place, tying up loose ends. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I wasn't alone in my office at the time. There was this physics teacher who, I'm not going to lie, was very easy on the eyes. He was this tall, lean guy with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through you. He wasn't your typical stiff, nerdy teacher. No, he was charismatic, funny, and had this cool vibe that made people gravitate toward him. Every time he came into my office, I felt a little more drawn to him. I had a bit of a crush, not going to lie. He was always so confident, so calm. We talk about everything from classes to random topics like movies, books, you name it. It was obvious that there was some sort of unspoken connection between us, though neither of us dared to cross any boundaries. Maybe I was too shy, or maybe it was because I didn't want to complicate things at work. But that day I was tired, like really tired. My mind was spinning from the exhaustion of back-to-back tests, and all I could think about was relaxing, just getting away from everything for one night. I was sitting in the classroom, my mind racing, completely distracted by the possibility of what could happen later that night. The physics teacher, who was sitting across from me, didn't make the situation any better. I couldn't help but think about how charismatic and easygoing he was. I knew he had noticed the way I looked at him, but neither of us had ever made the first move. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. There was something exciting about the mystery of it all. But as much as I wanted to keep our interaction casual, I couldn't help the spark that had started to grow inside me. And then, of course, the biology teacher walked in. Don't get me wrong, I didn't dislike him. He was just, well, a bit of a bore. He had this monotonous way of talking that made it hard to stay focused. But still, I found myself entertained by his presence in a different way. Like the type of person I could enjoy chatting with over coffee but wouldn't want to go out of my way to spend more time with. In fact, he was a teacher I probably would have enjoyed studying biology with, just for the strange comfort of his predictable, unexciting nature. But we weren't here to talk about that. I quickly pushed that thought aside as he started talking about the meeting. He had come in with a brief look of concern on his face, announcing that we were all being called to a meeting. Honestly, I didn't expect much from it, just the usual administrative stuff. It was one of those things where you know it's going to be long and boring, but you still have to attend. The university's leadership had asked for all of us to gather in the conference room, so we filed out of the classroom and into the sterile, uninviting space. The meeting was exactly what I had expected. Dull. The principal gave us an update about upcoming budget cuts. The vice principal discussed the university's new policies, and a few other senior staff members mentioned some procedural changes that none of us were likely to remember by the end of the week. We all sat there, listening to their prepared speeches, nodding along, though I'm sure most of us were just mentally checked out. I wasn't the only one looking for something else to focus on. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the leadership team wrapped up, and we were left with just the faculty. The once formal atmosphere shifted. Conversations started happening in little pockets around the room. Some teachers immediately started discussing the new changes. Others started talking about the next semester's course material, but I found myself completely disengaged from it all. All I could think about was what I had planned later that evening. The excitement was buzzing in the back of my mind, and the idea of letting go of everything, of just forgetting about the rules and the responsibilities, was intoxicating. I needed something to break the tension, to release the stress that had been building up for months. I leaned over to my friend, the English teacher, who had been sitting beside me throughout the meeting. She was someone I knew well, someone who could match my adventurous spirit. We had always shared a love of pushing boundaries, whether it was discussing the more daring books we read or just talking about our personal lives. She knew me better than most. I whispered in her ear, my voice barely audible as I told her what I was feeling. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about tonight. I'm actually considering going ahead with it." Her reaction wasn't exactly what I expected. She raised her eyebrows and gave me a skeptical smile. "You're crazy," she said, almost laughing. "But honestly, I wouldn't mind having some fun too." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was definitely intrigued, even if she was trying to play it cool. And that's when I realized. She was the kind of person who might not mind the idea of something a little unconventional, just like me. It was exactly what I had hoped for. She didn't fully shut me down, and that was enough encouragement for me. I could already picture the faces of the other teachers in the room, trying to gauge who would be interested in something different. There were a few I could immediately cross off, teachers who were just too reserved, too set in their ways to even entertain such an idea. But there were also a few who had always given off that vibe, the kind of people who, despite their professional demeanor, might secretly be up for something a little daring. I glanced around, waiting for the boring teachers to filter out of the room first. I could tell who would stay and who would leave. It was like a weird game of people watching, except I wasn't just observing for fun, I was strategizing. It was all part of the plan. I had already mentally filtered out the ones who wouldn't be interested. And then, the moment I was waiting for finally came. Slowly, the conversation in the room started to die down. The more uptight teachers began gathering their things, heading out one by one, probably to go back to their own offices or home. They didn't even notice the way the remaining teachers, those who were still lingering, started gravitating toward one another. I wasn't the only one who was tired of the usual academic routine. Now that the boring teachers were out, the space felt a little less stiff. It was time to see who would really bite. The atmosphere was ripe for something more exciting, and I was ready to take the leap. As the last few teachers filed out of the meeting room, only a handful remained. The biology teacher, as usual, was spouting some sort of academic fact I wasn't really paying attention to, but he had a steady, calm presence. Despite his boring lectures, I could tell he wasn't totally averse to the idea of unwinding after a long, stressful day. The physics teacher, as always, was more of a mystery to me. There was something magnetic about him, but I wasn't sure what it was. My friend, the English teacher, was still leaning in, watching everyone with interest, and the math teacher, who'd been mostly quiet, gave me a sideways glance that seemed to hint he was open to whatever came next. I couldn't hold it in anymore. There was a certain thrill in the idea I had in my head, one that had been slowly building all afternoon. The tension in the air, the fact that it was just us, the faculty, lingering in the room with no students to worry about. I whispered something to my friend and then looked around the room. "Hey, what do you think about this?" I said, trying to keep my voice low enough to be playful but serious enough that they could tell I wasn't joking. "How about we have a mini party right here, right now? To unwind after the day. Let's just let loose for a bit." I don't think anyone expected me to say that. Honestly, I was half waiting for them to think I'd lost my mind. But there was something exciting about the suggestion, something spontaneous. It wasn't like I'd planned anything elaborate or wild. It was more about the vibe, the idea of breaking free from the routine we were all caught in. For a moment no one spoke. The biology teacher raised an eyebrow, clearly processing what I'd said. The physics teacher seemed thoughtful, but a little hesitant. My friend, the English teacher, simply smirked, as if she was both shocked and amused at the same time. The math teacher, who had been quiet up until now, gave me a small nod. I could tell he was intrigued but unsure. I could sense their hesitation, but I didn't let it stop me. I had already made up my mind, and I was determined to see it through. I gave them a look, a serious one, and they could tell I wasn't backing down. "I'm not joking," I said firmly. "If we're going to unwind, we might as well do it now, right?" And with that, the mood shifted. The atmosphere lightened, and one by one, they started nodding in agreement. I could feel my heart race as I knew I was about to do something that none of us would forget. I stood up and walked over to the door, locking it quietly behind me. It was a small, simple act, but it felt like the first step into uncharted territory. As I turned back around, I could see the teachers exchanging glances. The biology teacher, still a bit more reserved, was watching me carefully. The physics teacher had a little grin on his face. Maybe he was curious, or maybe he was just enjoying the challenge of the moment. My friend was already laughing quietly, no doubt enjoying the idea more than anyone else in the room. The math teacher, usually so by the book, had his arms crossed, but he wasn't walking out. And then everything sort of fell into place. The initial awkwardness melted away as we all relaxed. Everyone was having the time of their lives in their own way, without any of the stress or pressure that typically accompanied our professional lives. It wasn't a grand event. It wasn't the wild, chaotic kind of party you see in movies, but there was a freedom to it. Release. We weren't just teachers in that room anymore. We were just people. I found myself spending most of my time with the physics and biology teacher. I was enjoying myself even if the biology teacher was still talking about, well, biology. He couldn't help himself. He was passionate about it, I guess, but I wasn't listening. My thoughts were elsewhere, feeling the buzz of what was happening and wondering if I should just let go completely. And just when things were winding down, just as we were all starting to head back to reality, it happened. I heard it, someone opening the door with a key. The university administration always had spare keys, and apparently someone had come by to check on us. Froze. The rest of the group did too, immediately realizing what was happening. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was the director. I can't even begin to explain the look on his face. His eyes widened as he took in the scene in front of him. I didn't even want to describe what he saw, honestly. It was one of those moments that felt like it was happening in slow motion. The awkwardness, the confusion, the disbelief. It was all there. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know if anyone else did either. The director just stood there, speechless, looking like he was trying to process what his eyes were telling him. I've never felt so exposed in my life, but there was no taking it back now. I knew this was going to be a problem, but at that moment, all I could do was hope he'd just leave without saying anything. Course that didn't happen. We all stood there, frozen, as the principal stared at us. The door was still open, and I could hear her chuckling, her laugh breaking the tense silence. It wasn't a joyful laugh, though. It was strained, almost like she was trying to hide her frustration behind the sound of her giggles. It was the kind of laugh that only made everything feel worse. Then, suddenly, the principal closed the door behind her with a loud thud. "I'm waiting for you all in my office," she shouted, her voice sharp, commanding. At that point, it was clear she wasn't going to let this go. The tension in the room escalated, and we all exchanged uncertain glances. I could already imagine what was coming. A stern warning, maybe a lecture on professionalism. It wasn't like we expected any severe punishment at that moment. We were still caught up in the aftermath of the shock. But, honestly, when we were all in that room together, I couldn't help but laugh. I didn't even mean to, but as the teachers around me started laughing too, it felt like some kind of release. The tension, the embarrassment, the awkwardness, it all hit us in waves, and the only thing we could do was laugh. The way the principal's face had twisted when she saw us. It was too much. We'd never expected to be caught like that, and the irony of it all hit us hard. We chuckled as we made our way to her office, and I couldn't help but joke a little as we entered. "You saw her face, right? That was priceless." But, honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen next. The rest of the teachers, still in that stunned state, exchanged looks and half-hearted laughs. None of us knew if we were in trouble or if it was going to be one of those talks where they tried to reason with us. But the moment we stepped into the principal's office, I could tell this wasn't going to be just a talk. She was standing behind her desk, her arms crossed, a look of disbelief still plastered on her face. Then, without warning, she slammed a stack of A4 sheets down in front of us. "Everyone, write a letter of resignation," she snapped, her voice loud and commanding. "What do you think you're doing? This isn't a joke." Her voice wavered between anger and disbelief, and I could tell she was beyond furious. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. My stomach dropped, and for the first time I started to panic. I tried to hold it together, but the stress of it all came crashing down on me. It was at that moment that I couldn't help it. I laughed again. It was a nervous, stressful laugh, but it just escaped from me. It wasn't funny. I knew that. But the situation had escalated so quickly that I couldn't stop myself. I felt like I was on autopilot, and as I glanced around, I saw that my laughter only made things worse. The other teachers were stiff, their faces flushed with embarrassment or fear, and the principal's glare only deepened. The longer I stayed in that office, the more I realized I had made a huge mistake. I had gotten us all into this mess. I hadn't meant for things to go this far. It was just supposed to be a fun, light-hearted way to unwind, but I had taken it too far. The weight of what I had done started to sink in, and it felt suffocating. We all eventually left the principal's office, heads down, and walked to collect our things. No one said a word. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and when I looked around, I could feel the anger from my colleagues. Their faces were full of frustration and disbelief, and I could feel the weight of their stares. I had no idea how to fix it. I had no idea how to make it right. I kept telling myself that I hadn't forced anyone into anything, that they were all adults, capable of making their own decisions. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. I had made a decision that affected everyone, and I couldn't undo it. Couldn't fix it. I didn't even bother to make eye contact with anyone as I packed up my things. I didn't even finish gathering everything. I just needed to leave. Without saying goodbye, I slipped out the back door and headed straight to my car. As I drove home, my mind was a mess. The drive felt like it took forever, but I barely noticed the time passing. I was numb, but at the same time I could feel the tears starting to build up. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't hold them in anymore. I burst into tears, the weight of everything crashing down on me all at once. I had betrayed everyone, and for what? A stupid idea that had spiraled out of control. I couldn't take back what I had done. Couldn't fix it. For the next 7 days, I stayed in my house. I didn't leave. I didn't want to see anyone, hear from anyone, or deal with what I had done. My phone stayed silent and nobody called. Not a single message came through. I was left alone with my thoughts, and the guilt gnawed at me. I knew I'd lost my job, and probably everyone else's too. But what hurt the most was that I knew I had let them down. I had dragged them into this mess. On the 8th day, I decided I couldn't stay locked away forever. I needed to talk to someone. I dialed my friend's number, the English teacher who had been there with me. When she didn't answer the first few times, I felt a little relieved. I wasn't sure I was ready to face her yet. But when she finally picked up, the tone of her voice was enough to send a chill down my spine. She was furious. "What have you done to me?" she yelled. "Because of you, I lost my job. I can't even go to another university now. I'm done." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I had ruined her career, just like I had ruined mine. She was no longer accepted at any university, and it was all because of my idea. I felt my chest tighten, my heart breaking as I cried into the phone. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the people I had hurt, the friendships I had destroyed, and the opportunities one had taken away from everyone. I knew I had to leave. There was nothing left for me in this town. I packed up what little I had left and moved to another city. I couldn't stay in the same place anymore. I needed to start fresh, away from the shame and regret that followed me. But as I drove away, I couldn't escape the thought that I had betrayed everyone for a stupid, impulsive idea. And in the end, it wasn't funny anymore. It was a disaster. As I mentioned before, it's been almost a year since that moment. Now, I'm living in a completely different part of the US, and I still regret what I did. Back then, I was playing with fire. I set everyone up. And what can I conclude from all of this? A momentary thrill is not worth the consequences that can follow. That brief pleasure changed my life for the worse. I lost my friends, my job, and completely ruined my reputation. And for what? For 20 minutes of excitement. I absolutely do not recommend anyone to get involved in something like this. I'm telling you this story so that you understand my mistake and never make the same one. I still call myself an idiot for what happened. Let me know in the comments what you think of me.